Right. Why don't we get going for today? And if someone else joins us, I'll let them in. So I want to say thank you very much for joining me. Ah, yes, Preeti. I want to say thank you very, very much for joining me today. My name is Stefan. I'm currently a lecturer at a university in Melbourne. And the topic that I lecture on to students across all ages, even young students all the way through to much older students, is what is called design thinking, or creative and critical thinking. Problem solving is being able to introduce a set of tools to people, students and alike, that provide them with confidence to be able to solve really, really difficult problems. Okay. So let's have a look. So design thinking, how can we solve problems with creative thinking? Our world is full of problems. Okay, so everything from dirty water to hunger around the globe, to pollution, to bullying, online bullying, to climate change, to issues about the environment, transport issues, financial issues, etc., etc. And it's always difficult. People say, how do we solve these problems? Well, the one thing I can tell you is we can't solve it on our own, and we can't solve it in the same way as we always have. We have to think a little differently. So some problems are small and simple to solve. Others are a bit more complex, and still others are really big. You may think big problems are really difficult to solve, but this is where design thinking fits in, where this process fits in. So what is design thinking? It's a 5-step problem-solving process that teaches you how to change your mindset and be more creative, allowing you to solve really big problems using your imagination, like a roadmap. If you went on a journey across the continent, or across, like with Oliver, from Sydney to Melbourne, there'll be road signs along the way. And that'll guide us in a certain direction, and we'll be able to gain confidence as we go to know we've got to the first town, and then we know how long it is to get to the second town, and how long it is to get to the third town, and so forth. So there'll be a roadmap for us to go along and get to the other side successfully. And sometimes along the road, we'll have to stop and take a breather, and maybe have a glass of water and something to eat, and then collect our thoughts and talk to our friends, but then we'll continue. And ultimately, we know we're traveling for, like I used the example with Oliver, from Sydney to Melbourne. Okay. Now, these big problems are often difficult to solve, and so we call them wicked problems, not because they are scary, but because they are very complex and can be affected by many factors. So let's use the idea of the journey from Sydney to Melbourne. As we are traveling, even before we set out, we have to decide on the time we're going to leave. We have to decide what we're going to pack. We are going to decide which path we're going to take. We are going to have to decide which motor vehicle. We're going to have to decide who's going to sit in the front of the car and who's going to sit at the back. You will maybe have to decide what music you're going to play along the way. Then along the journey, things can happen. Maybe you get a flat tire and it affects you. Or maybe you meet a friend and they say, don't go all the way to Melbourne, come stay a night at our home, etc., etc. So what we are saying, there are many, many different factors that can affect your journey on the way to the destination. And the destination which we're trying to do is to solve a difficult problem. So in general, wicked problems are highly complex social issues involving people. By using design thinking, you will find there are lots of ways to solve these problems. It's like a big piece of machinery in a factory. We want to get something out at the end, but we can put different color materials in. We can put lots of materials in. We can put little materials in. We can have one person putting it in. We can have two people putting it in, etc., etc. So there are lots of different ways to solve a problem. We don't have, there's not just one single way. But design thinking is what we call human-centered, and that means we always think about the people involved. You need to put people at the center of your thinking. It's about finding a practical solution for their needs, not yours, for their needs. So we have to think of the people at the center of everything that we do. And design thinking has a set of tools. It provides us with a set of tools that makes it easy for you to collect, organize, and make sense of information. So for example, if the big problem was repairing the bicycle, you have a bicycle that maybe has a flat tire, you would go and find a set of tools to be able to, you can loosen the nut, you can change the tire, you can replace the brakes, you can put oil on the chain. There's a set of tools for everything that you need to do in life. And in the same way, design thinking has a set of tools that makes it easy for us to collect, organize, and make sense of information, and thereby ensuring that the solution to the big problem, and I know these are big words, viable, feasible, and desirable, but what they really means is, are we going to make a solution or develop a solution that meets the needs of the people, that can be afforded, that we can afford to make it and continue making it, okay? And that we have the current technology or available technology to make this happen. So we have to think of the people and their needs, the technology, and the money, the financial side. And we try and make sure that those three work together to come up with a really, really good solution, a really practical, good solution. So design thinking requires you to undertake research in order to find the right solution. You mustn't just guess. When there's a problem, you can't say, I think this will fix it. You have to investigate. So you have to think of yourself as being a detective, like investigating and looking for clues in order to identify the reasons for the problem. So for example, if you are riding out on your bicycle through the bush and you're going up and down, and suddenly you have a flat tire, your initial thought might be, well, I've gone over a nail. But maybe if you looked a little bit closer, maybe it's not a nail. Maybe you went over a rock, or maybe the tire was just old and it broke, etc., etc. So there could be various reasons why the problem has happened. Now, there are 5 steps in design thinking. These are called empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Okay, so let's say those again: empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. 5 steps. Now, another way to remember this is this: elephants definitely ignore purple tigers. Elephants definitely ignore purple tigers. So the E, which represents elephant, stands for empathy. How we can relate to the feelings of others. Can we understand how they are feeling? The D stands for define. And what that means is to discover meaning. When they're going to tell us things and we're going to investigate, we're going to discover some things, and we're going to have to make some sense of this, understand the meaning. The I stands for ideate. That is to imagine, to think of big ideas, to use our imagination, to develop concepts, to brainstorm. The P stands for prototype, and a prototype is a simple little model that you make of your ideas to bring it to life, that you can show it to someone, that you can share it to someone to get feedback. And partly in showing it to someone, you are testing it. Is it really as good as you thought? Is it really going to work as well as you thought? And then you'll be able to get feedback from these individuals or from your friends, and they'll be able to tell you what they like, what they don't like, what you can improve. Maybe they want it in a different color. Maybe they want it in a different size. Who knows? So let's look at the 5 steps individually. First one is E, step number 1, empathy. So what does empathy mean? Empathy means to learn about people, to get to know their needs, to walk in their shoes, to understand their experiences, their pain, and how they are feeling. This is where research is important. So if you are, for example, let's take the one example I had in the beginning, like bullying. If you see your friend getting bullied, or you know about the bullying, you need to go and speak to them and understand how they are feeling. What is upsetting them? How do they feel about it? What would they like change? What do they hope you'll be able to solve? D means define. And define means to make sense of all the information that you have collected. So when you are a detective and you look for all this information, you could have 10 pieces of information, you can have 100 pieces of information, but you have to now have all this information and make sense of it. So we need to organize it. We need to look for patterns. We need to look what links together. We need to see if we can identify the real problem, because sometimes the problem isn't as obvious as we think. So how do we organize all this information? We'll have a look at that. The third step is ideate, thinking of ideas. This is when we become the designer. It's the creative process we follow when you think of a possible solution. This can take the form of a drawing, creating a new phone application, or whatever you think you have an idea to solve this problem. You can think of anything. You and your friends and your team and your teachers and your parents can think of all the ideas, and as many ideas as possible. The more ideas, the better. Then we have prototype. Now you've got all these wonderful ideas. So we need to choose the best idea or the best one or two ideas, and then we need to build them. We need to make our ideas come to life. We call this prototyping, and then share it with our friends. By building a sample of your solution, you're able to see if your idea will work as you had planned. Remember, your idea is in your mind, and even although you can explain it to people, until you build it in your hands and you pass it to your friend across the table in the class, they don't know exactly what you were thinking. So if I said to everyone now, think of a white box, please go and make a white box and bring it to the table, I can almost guarantee that every single box will be slightly different. But if I said to everyone, my box must be 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters, then we'll all know, and we'll be able to make exactly the same box, and we'll be on the same page. The final step is step number 5, test. And it's important that you test your ideas. And to do this, you should share your prototype, your model, with friends, with your team. And then you need to watch their reactions. This will tell you what they like or not, and this is called feedback. This is important. It's like, for example, if you've never played an Xbox before, and you invite a friend around, and they're not sure how to use the console. The natural thing to do is, when they're struggling, is to take it away from them and say, let me show you. What we really need to do is let them stay with the console, and you explain to them and let them experience the console for themselves, because that's how they're going to learn the most, and how you're going to learn the most about that potential item or solution. So here are the 5 steps: empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So in empathy, we learn about the person, we get to understand their needs. In define, we identify the real issue or problem, and we look at the information. In ideate, we think of ideas, small, big, even crazy ideas, and we use our imagination. In prototyping, this is where we choose an idea to build. We make it real, we bring it to life. And finally, test. Test your idea on people and listen to their feedback. Now I'm going to show you an example. We've learned about the 5 stages. We have a basic understanding of what we need to do. And I've told you that this process called design thinking, we can use to solve many different types of problems. As I said, everything from really big problems like hunger or the climate change or poverty and that, but we can also use this to solve really smaller problems, okay? Problems in the classroom, problems when you're working on a project together, problems when you maybe, fixing your bicycle with your friends, or you're building a cubby house or whatever. You can apply these principles. So let's have a look at an example. One day, Jeff went to the beach and he heard people talking about the turtles and that they'd not returned to the beach to lay their eggs. And Jeff wondered if this was a real problem. Well, he wasn't sure. No one had told him before. He always knew they came, but now he heard people saying that they never came back, and he wondered, was this a real problem? So Jeff was worried. He wondered if this had happened before. He looked around. Jeff noticed the beach was littered with lots of huge straws and plastic bags, and the water looked a little dirty and grey, but was this really stopping the turtles? Did this stop the turtles coming? He really wasn't sure. So he knew he had to become a detective to better understand what was happening. But he could not do this alone. It would take teamwork. This job was too big for one person. And who would help him? Because he knew that if he had a lot of people thinking about a problem, they'd be able to solve it maybe quicker, maybe easier, maybe better. So who could help him? So Jeff went to see his friends. Jeff's friends, Stephanie, Neva, and Colin. And together they sat and they could think about the problem and share ideas. So they sat around the table, they got out some pens and paper, and they started writing down all the things about the turtles. They wrote down about the plastic, and they wrote down about the water, and they wrote down about the straws on the beach. And they wrote down, we need the questions like, how long has this been happening? How many turtles used to come? Why aren't they coming, etc. And as the saying goes, many hands make light work. So as a team, they spoke to people, they asked questions, they went to the library, they read books, they looked on YouTube, they did a Google search, and they even spoke to a fisheries and wildlife expert, because they don't just want to guess ideas or guess answers. They want someone to tell them, this is what we have found. This is the research. They want to know that the data that they are collecting is real, it's authentic, it's accurate, it's reviewed, and so forth, so that they know what they're going to base their decisions on is really good, high quality information. But they wanted some more information. All the information they got before was things that had happened in the past. And part of being a good detective is to get new information. So they decided to go camp on the beach that night and keep a lookout for the turtles. They wanted to observe what was happening for themselves. And then they knew that this would be some new knowledge. And maybe there were some things that were different that no one else had thought of before, or no one else had recorded before. And Jeff took notes. This was important. He captured the information. He took notes. He recorded the time and the weather and any strange noises he heard. Together they collected the rubbish samples, and they noticed a fox running around. And Jeff and Neva wondered how this fox had got onto the beach and whether the foxes was really a big problem. So they took notes of everything. And Stephanie heard an engine revving hard, and then she saw a large 4x4 with bright lights racing up and down close to the water's edge. That night, no turtles came ashore. Were these things that they were finding, were they really important? They weren't sure. And then they were sitting there wondering, and in the moonlight, Colin saw a big fishing boat close to the shore. They wondered if this boat or boats like this were stopping the turtles reaching the beach. Were they catching the turtles? Were there nets in the water? Were they polluting the water with the petrol and the oil and the gasoline? Were the noises of the boat scaring them away? So maybe the turtles were still there, but the turtles were maybe clever enough to go to another beach. We don't know. They stayed at the beach for a few more nights, as having more information would give them a better chance of understanding the problem and seeing it from a different point of view. This is important, that we have as much information and that we can look at things from different perspectives. And some things we'll find may be really important and other things might not be as important. Or something may come to light that we say, I wish we knew a little bit more. Let's go investigate a little bit more. Or some things might be joined together. They returned home in the morning. Now it was time to bring all the information together. Nevo decided to transfer it onto sticky notes, and he placed these on the bedroom wall. But they needed to create some order. There was so much information on these post-it notes or sticky notes that they couldn't make sense of it. And it's really important that when you have your information, you create some order. So with the information, and then they made little columns. They put all the information about, let's say, about the foxes in column 1, and everything about the boats in column 2, and everything about the dirt on the beach, the plastic bags in column 3, and everything about the moonlight in column 4 or whatever. And they put all the things that made sense together into columns. They created an order. And with the information in order, they were now able to see patterns, relationships, plus where more information might be needed. And this process of creating order helped them identify the problem. So having order is like having a treasure map. You remember we spoke about the road map, traveling from Sydney to Melbourne? It's like having a treasure map, pointing you in the right direction towards the X, showing you what needs to be solved, making sure you always stay focused, because it's really easy to get distracted when you're investigating. But like a good detective, they know, they're going to find the person who did X, and they are focused on that, and they don't get distracted along the way. So having identified the real problem, you're now able to start thinking of ideas, because if we don't know what the real problem is, we don't know which ideas to think of. Okay, so we now understand the real problem, and now we're able to start thinking of ideas on how to help the turtles. But you need a lot of ideas, okay? And to get all these ideas, you need to go and sit in what we call a nice, relaxed space that will help open your creative thinking. Go sit on a comfortable couch, maybe get yourself a glass of water or a lovely cup of tea. Put a pillow behind your head, maybe put on some soft music or whatever. Go sit in a place where you want to be comfortable. Maybe you like sitting outside in the garden. Maybe you like sitting down in a workshop. Go find the place that allows your creative mind to work best. So ideation requires you to think of big ideas, small ideas, round ideas, flat ideas, crazy ideas. Maybe you need to turn some ideas on their head. Maybe you need to share ideas with some of your friends. Maybe you need to add some thoughts to their ideas. You need to do what we call think outside the box. Don't think all the normal things. Think some crazy ideas. There's no limit to what you can think, how you think you can solve it. Remember, it's your imagination. It's your imagination. You can say, I want to go to the moon. And if you dream it and you follow your direction, you could go to the moon. Or you could say, I want to do X, Y, Z. Now, there are lots of different ideas you'll come up with. Big ideas, small ideas, skew ideas, yellow ideas, blue ideas. But we think of as many as we possibly can. And Colin, one of Jeff's friends, thought about all the rubbish and the plastic waste that was affecting the Great Barrier Reef. She's passionate about the environment. And she realized, the Great Barrier Reef is full of so many amazing fish and turtles, and she really wanted to help them. She was really quite upset about the turtles not coming back. And she wondered, where did all this rubbish come from? All this, the dirt on the beach and the noise and everything. And she questioned who was responsible. Because once you know who's responsible and where it came from, you may be able to solve it better. So after thinking of many ideas, Jeff, Stephanie, and the rest of the team, together they selected the best. So as a team, they evaluated all the ideas and they selected the best ones. And then once they had chosen one or two of the best, they then made a rough model of the idea. And we call this rapid prototyping. They made a little model. Do you remember I spoke about the white box? If I said to you, let's all go and make a white box, when we come back in 5 minutes' time, our boxes will be slightly different size. Maybe the white will be slightly off-white, the other will be bright white. Maybe one will have a lid, maybe one won't have a lid, maybe one will have a hole in, maybe one won't. But by making a model of your ideas, everyone is clear on what you mean and how you see it working. And we call this prototyping. So prototype is important, as this allows you to show people and thereby test it. You need to see if your solution will work. Testing lets you get feedback and a chance to fix things. Now, remember, the first time you test something, maybe not everyone likes it. That's not a problem. It's great to get feedback from your friends because they say, look, why don't you make it a little bit bigger? Why don't you make it a little bit longer? Have you thought of changing the color? What if we put 2 legs, not 4 legs? There's nothing wrong with feedback. Feedback is the way we get an opportunity to experience and grow and change things. So feedback is important. So Jeff and his friends, they thought of some ideas. And one thing they thought of was, what if we built a fence and put a big, strong fence up on the beach to see if this would keep both the 4-wheel drive vehicles and the foxes out? That was one of their ideas. So this was their prototype. They maybe made a little small fence first because they tested the wood and they tested the wire and they worked out how deep the poles need to go into the sand. But then they went out and they put it on the beach and they're going to test it out. They also thought of, well, what if the turtles come back and they lay their eggs? Maybe we must protect the eggs so that the fence keeps the foxes out, But now that the eggs are exposed, so why don't we build little wire cages to cover future nests once the turtles had laid the eggs, thereby stopping foxes and large birds from maybe getting them. Now, I can't tell you all the ideas that Jeff, Stephanie, Neva, and Colin had, but the turtles did return the next year. Now, maybe you can think of some more ideas to help the turtles and other animals living on our beaches. So remember, if by using the 5 steps of this process, the design thinking process, empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test, you can solve almost any problem, both big and small, at home or in the classroom, or even save our planet. And lastly, elephants definitely ignore purple tigers. Thank you very much. Any questions?